All right. Hello again, Avengers, and welcome to another exciting in-depth review. Today, I'm going to be doing an in-depth review of the Fabula Ultima core book. I never got a chance to do an in-depth review for this, so it has been out for a few years, but it's definitely worth talking about. Quick reminder, if you do enjoy this stuff, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super important. Now, this is going to be an in-depth review. And when I say in-depth, I mean in-depth. I'm going to talk about, I'm going to go chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page. I'm going to talk about the things that I like, the things that I don't like, the things I think they did well, the things I think they need to do better. But a lot of people don't want to sit through like a 2-hour long video just to figure out if they want to buy something. So I always start these off with a section called Should You Buy This? And I separate potential buyers into 3 basic groups. The first group is a group that I call players. Players are people that are going to be primarily, not exclusively, but primarily sitting down at a table and playing a single player character. Obviously, they have different needs and wants than other groups. The second group is a group that I call GMs, or Game Masters. They are people that are primarily, not exclusively, but primarily going to be sitting down at a table and running the game. They're going to be writing the stories to a point. We'll talk about that a little bit later here in this particular game. Running the monsters, creating NPCs, playing the NPCs, all of those fun things. Obviously, they have different wants and needs than the players. The third group is a group that is very commonly just completely forgotten about. I call them Lorehounds. Lorehounds are people that may never sit down at a table to play anything, but they really enjoy the lore or the world that the game takes place in. So obviously they have different needs than both other 2 groups. So, should you buy this? Well, let's find out. The first group. Should players buy this game? So, with any of these core books, there's always the caveat of, if you want to play the game, you have to buy the core book. We're done with that, okay? That's already the argument. As far as this particular core book in this particular game, how, as a player, are you going to be approaching it? Fabula Ultima is by far one of my favorite tabletop RPGs I've ever found. And I've ever run. I ran a mini campaign using it a couple years ago, and it was so much fun. Genuinely, everything about it is just really amazing. It takes inspiration from old school JRPGs from like the 90s. Things like the old Final Fantasy games, Chrono Trigger, the Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior, depending on what country you were in at the time. Stuff like that. All very fantasy based, as we'll get into a little later. So for players specifically, the interesting things about this game is it's kind of a halfway point between a rules light and a real crunchy RPG, going much more towards the rules light aspect when you are playing the game. You have 4 stats or attributes that I can't think of what they are right now off the top of my head. And each one of those is assigned a die. Whenever you make a roll, the GM will ask you to roll 2 of those stats. You know, make an insight check or a dex might check or something like that. Basically what that means, you just take the die that is assigned to that and roll it with another one. You're always rolling 2 dice. You add them together, and you need to keep track of the high roll because that will affect some of your skills. It's a deceptively simple game. There isn't a skill system like you would see in like Dungeons and Dragons, where you have like acrobatics checks or things like that. Basically, the things that make your character more uniquely able to do things are these 3 aspects of your character: your your identity, your theme, and your origin. Your identity is just a short sentence that describes your character, like maybe you are a royal knight or a battle priestess of the old faith or a magitech scientist. Your theme is some kind of ideal that you have, like belonging or anger or mercy or justice. And then your origin is literally where you came from. And whenever you're rolling, you can invoke one of those three things in order to re-roll one or both of your dice and spend what's called a Fabula point. We'll deal with that later. The thing that I think most players really get into is the character creation, specifically when we get to classes. Creating the actual characters themselves is fun. Doing the origin and the theme and the identity, that stuff's really, really fun. But once you get into the classes, that's where things start getting really, really interesting. The way Fabula Ultima works is when you create your character, it starts at level 5. The reason why is you have to basically create your own class by combining the skills of at least 2, but no more than 3 of the classes that exist in the game. So the classes themselves are Arcanist, Chimerist, Darkblade, Elementalist, Entropist, Fury, Guardian, Loremaster, Orator, Rogue, Sharpshooter, Spiritist, Tinkerer, Wayfarer, and Weapon Master. So you pick 2 or 3 of those, and basically each one of those classes has 5 different skills that every level you get a new skill. So you pick a collection of skills from these different classes, and now you have your character. It means that every single character feels very unique, and it truly allows for a very wide breadth of characters. You want a character that, your classic monk, mix some fury with weapon master, and maybe add in an elementalist in there to give them a little bit of that key magic. You want to be that kind of traditional death knight. Get Darkblade, Weapon Master, and maybe Entropist to give you some of that dark magic. You want to be your more classic kind of druid. Mix Chimerist with Elementalist. Maybe add in a Lore Master to that. There's so many different unique ways to create your character. And then playing the game is, again, relatively simplistic, I guess is the word I'm thinking of, but it seems simplistic, and it really isn't. There's no maps and minis. You do combat very similar to you would see in an old school RPG, where you just or an old school JRPG on the Super Nintendo, where the bad guys are lined up on one side and the good guys are lined up on the other, and you take turns attacking each other until one side dies. Now, that doesn't mean that combat is really simple or basic or anything like that. There is a lot of strategy that can go into choosing who gets to go next, choosing which skills and abilities that you use. And the other really amazing thing about the game is clocks. We'll talk more about that in the Game Master section, but clocks are basically things that require you to succeed multiple times or fail multiple times in order for the end result to happen. And sometimes you'll deal with those when you're not in combat. There'll be some combat encounters that have clocks involved with them. And so all these things means that this is a very, very dynamic, fun game. And then you also have all the different weapons and armor and things like that, and the ability to kind of create new weapons and armor and things like that. It's a really, really interesting, fun game. So do I recommend this to players? 100% yes. Again, I am biased because I already love this game. But if you enjoy anything involving JRPGs ever, if you ever enjoyed Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest or Chrono Trigger or Lufia, anything in that kind of fantasy JRPG setting, you will probably absolutely adore this game. It is so much fun. The other thing that I really like about it in general, if you're looking at a core book, especially if you're looking at a physical version of the core book, 9 times out of 10, you're going to be paying a minimum of $60 for it. Some of the newer core books come out at like $70. The core book for this, currently you can't get it because it's sold out. But the listed price in the US, this is an Italian-made game, is $29.90. So it's just under $30 for a physical version of the core book. Now, they have mentioned that they're going to be doing a Kickstarter relatively soon for a new kind of deluxe edition of the core book that I think comes with the expansions as well. And I think they were also thinking about kickstarting a Bestiary as well. So you probably will be able to get the physical version of the core book then. However, if you just get the digital version is $17.90. And again, the reason these prices are so weird is it's translating it from euros. Because, again, it's Italian-made game. Italy is part of the European Union. They use the euro there. So I don't know what the euro price is, but it turns into just under $18. $18 for a 360-page, gorgeously illustrated, really kind of dense book. And when I say dense, I mean there's a lot of stuff packed into those 360 pages. It's an absolute steal. Even if you are not a massive fan of JRPGs, the system itself is adaptable and generic enough that you can use it to play just about any kind of game that you want, especially if you start dealing with some of the expansions that they released for it, which I have done in-depth reviews for 2 of the 3 expansions. Maybe the 3rd one will be coming out after this. Who knows? But yes, this is a very much, for $18, it is hard to say no to so much content. So, yeah. Moving on. The second group. Should GMs buy this book? As I mentioned before, this book and this game system is inspired by old school JRPGs. It has a lot of kind of that anime influence to it. The artwork itself, very anime-esque. If that's what you're interested in, you will absolutely love this book. However, there are a bunch of other things in here that even if you never run Fabula Ultima, they are wonderful tools to put into your GM toolkit. And the one that I love the most is what are called clocks. Now, they have said explicitly in the book, if you go just before the table of contents, on page 4 of the book, there is a section titled Origin and Inspiration, where they basically just talk about the various games that kind of inspired them to make this. One of them is specifically listed John Harper's Blades in the Dark, from which the clock mechanic was directly derived. So clocks are not something that are unique to Fabula Ultima. I have not played, nor do I own Blades in the Dark. It's on my list. Don't start. It's on my list of stuff I want to get. It's just, it costs money, and I don't have a lot of that. And so I just haven't had a reason to pick it up yet. But I know the system. I've heard it over and over and over again. It's a wonderful system. I just don't got it yet. So clocks are not something that are entirely unique to Fabula Ultima, but the way that they describe them in here is so great. Effectively, what a clock is it's a circle that the players can see. And it has various sections. A simple clock would only have 4 sections. A really advanced clock might have up to 8 sections. And the way that a clock works is you introduce a clock when something is happening in the game that's not a simple pass-fail system. And basically, every time they succeed on whatever they're trying to do, you fill up a section of the clock. Once the clock is full, whatever is supposed to happen, happens. And clocks can be both beneficial or bad. I can't think of the other word I was thinking. Detrimental. There we go. They can be beneficial or detrimental. You can have a clock for a number of failures, and once it fills up, you get the result of the failures. It actually reminded me of the old skills challenge system from D&D 4th edition. In that, what you had was you would have these skills challenges, and you would have to get so many successes before so many failures. And if you got enough successes, then things went really well and you got what you wanted. And if you got too many failures, then things went poorly. They were a fantastically designed system that made everything more interesting. One of my favorite examples, Chris Perkins ran an adventure for the Robot Chicken folks. And in the kind of final boss battle of that Robot Chicken battle, in addition to having combat, they also had a skills challenge that they had to deal with. And if they did well, the battle would become easier. And if I remember correctly, I think they did poorly, and so something got summoned and they had to fight an additional really powerful monster. So the same thing is true about the clock system in Fabula Ultima. It's basically anytime you want to introduce something that is not a simple pass-fail, you can introduce it as a clock. The advantage of the clock itself, the kind of basics of the clock is it should be something that the players can see. You should have a visual representation of the clock somewhere on the table so that all your players can see it. It can be as simple as you draw a circle and then put the sections in there and then slowly fill them up. You can get fancy and actually have a device that you use, a reusable device. When I ran it on Roll20, I actually purchased a clock add-on from Roll20. I think it cost me like a couple bucks. And so anytime I would introduce a clock, I would literally put a clock on the map and I could cause it to just increase or decrease. The thing about having clocks on the map is that the players can constantly see it, and depending on what it represents, like one of the examples they give for clocks in there is the idea of is the idea of you're sneaking through an area, and so the clock represents how many times you effectively fail your stealth checks. Once it's fully fulfilled, that means the alarm has been set off. But your clocks can also have like partially filled things. Like once you get 2 sections, then extra people will start coming around. Or once you get 3 sections, perhaps they turn all the lights on to make checks that much more difficult. But having a visual representation of how close you are to succeeding or failing changes how the players deal with everything. Having it there and seeing it in front of them makes it that much more real. The other thing that is really, really amazing about Fabula Ultima for the DMs is the artifact system. Artifacts are these magic items that the players are not intended to ever wield or use. Like if you look at D&D, magic items are designed to be used. Even legendary ones designed to be used. Artifacts are designed to drive the story forward. They are mythical items. Like to give an example real quick. The first artifact they have in the core book, or the second one, it's the first one on the second page, is called Black Blood, a large vial filled with an oily and sticky black substance. It is said this liquid was gathered from a tainted spring in the depths of the earth. Those who drink it gain a peculiar ability. When killed, their spirit will not return to the stream of souls that permeates the world. Instead, they will retain their conscience and remain bound to the land of the living. Why anyone would choose such a fate remains a mystery, however. So an artifact is this item that really changes the world, and people countries around the world and all these different forces are going to be fighting over this item. So it is a plot item that drives the story forward. Something like that can be incredibly useful for game masters to design campaigns around, design little adventures around. So the system itself, like I said, is great. The character system, if you watch the player focus part, the character system is absolutely wonderful. The monster system is great. The bestiary that's in here only has like a couple dozen monsters because you are expected to create the monsters and the world itself as you run. So it is a little bit... it does take a little bit more work to run a Fabula Ultima game than maybe like a pre-written D&D adventure. But the other thing that's great about Fabula Ultima for GM specifically is that the players are intended to be writing the game just as much as the Dungeon Master is. Part of your session 0 is you are supposed to create the world that you're adventuring in with the players. And they even have blank maps that you can use, so you don't have to design your own maps. So it is a very collaborative experience in general. And the things that the GM does need to design, they have really clear rules for how to make anything. Your monsters, your magic items, even designing your own artifacts. They have rules and tables that you can use to make creation very, very easy. So again, for $18 for the digital version, again, even if you never run the game, just adapting some of the systems in here that are massively well designed will help you in any system you want. But having run the game myself, it's also a shit ton of fun to run. I had so much fun running this game, and I would gladly do it again and again and again. It is just insanely fun to do and experience, and you do feel kind of creatively fulfilled when doing it, because you are creating the entire world when you sit down. Whereas something like D&D, you might be playing in the Forgotten Realms, which is a world that has existed for almost 50 years. And so much of the design of the world you had no say in. This, not only do you get to create your world from scratch, but the players get to help you create it. It's just phenomenally fun. And again, if you can find the physical book somewhere, $30 is a great price for it. I don't know what it goes for on eBay or anywhere else where you might be able to find it. But like I said, they're hopefully going to be running a Kickstarter to be able to get it, to get something for physical again if you are a fan of physical books. So, moving on. The third group. Should Lorehounds buy this book? This becomes kind of interesting. Again, Lorehounds, by definition, are interested in the world that the game takes place in. However, Fabula Ultima not only doesn't have a default setting for it, it actively discourages people from using a pre-built setting. Part of creating your characters is supposed to include you creating the world you're going to adventure in. So because of that, there's not as much lore here. By definition, they can't have a lot of little lore here because it just doesn't exist. They want you to create the little lore. And that might turn away a lot of Lorehounds. That being said, this is a very, for lack of a better term, this is a very lore-based game. What I mean by that, one of the things I talk about in a lot of different TTRPGs is the idea that your lore should inspire your mechanics. There are a lot of TTRPGs, D&D is one of them, where it's very, very obvious that there are certain rules and things that they added in there that are mechanics that they had to come up with an in-game reason why those mechanics exist. And that can work perfectly fine. but it doesn't feel very fulfilling, and it generally will generally eventually create issues with things down the road. However, if you start from the lore and then let the mechanics be directly inspired by the lore, then you never really have contradictions. So as much as there isn't a default setting in this, the all the mechanics are still very lore based. It's just the lore is genericized to a point that you can adapt it however you want. What I mean by that, if you go to like the character classes, one of my favorite classes is the Arcanist. When we do the in-depth version of this in-depth review, I will probably spend 2 hours talking about the Arcanist because I just love it. When you go to any of the character classes, they generally take up 2 pages. Though some of them, especially the ones that use magic, will have a bunch of extra pages for their spells or whatever. The Arcanist is one of those. On the first page, you will have a beautiful illustration of the character class, and then you will have a short paragraph kind of explaining the lore behind the class. I'll read the Arcanist right now. Arcanists can fall into a deep trance and temporarily project a considerable portion of their soul outside the body, giving it physical form. Surrounded by this magical shroud, the Arcanist gains a variety of supernatural abilities. These summoned forms are said to be manifestations of the ancestral souls belonging to mythical entities of legend, known as the Arcana. In some worlds, the Arcana are even worshipped as deities. So, is there a default campaign setting for this? No, but everything is based on lore. This one character class has a very fascinating, interesting lore basis. And then each one of these skills will sometimes have some lore written into them. A lot of them are mostly mechanical. And then after you have the description, you have these little questions that you can ask to kind of help develop the character. So for the Arcanist, where do your powers come from? Are they a gift from your bloodline? Have you ever communicated with an Arcanum? Or are they silent in distance? Do people see you as mysterious, powerful, or otherworldly? Are there many practicing your art? Or are you the exception? So, yes, for Lorehounds, if you're looking for something that you're really going to be able to dive in and learn about the various lands and everything like that, you're not going to get that from any of the Fabula Ultima books. But if you want something that's going to inspire your creativity and inspire you to come up with some really cool what ifs, that is everywhere in this book. There are so many places where they will kind of hide lore in there to explain why this mechanic works this particular way. And the lore is written in such a way that it is inspirational. It's really, really fascinating and interesting, and has inspired me to go, hey, what if in one of the worlds that I run this game in, what if we have Arcanists to basically be like dragoons, where instead of just like summoning like a Final Fantasy summoner, when they manifest it, they literally create like an Arcanist armor where they manifest it on top of themselves, and it gives them access to these new abilities. That would be super, super cool. Or in another world, they are identical to the kind of Final Fantasy IV style of summoner, where there are these magical beings called Eidolons, and you have to win their respect in order to be able to summon them. And when they summon, they do amazing, wonderful things. Like, it just inspired me so much to just go on these little kind of mind journeys where I just go, what if this for the world? And if that's the kind of lorehound that you are going to love this book. There are so many things, especially looking at things like the artifacts. I mentioned in the GM section, but artifacts are basically magic items that are so powerful that no one is actually expected to use them. They drive stories forward. And so each artifact has a little description after it, kind of hinting at what kind of stories would be fueled by these artifacts. For example, for the GMs, I read the Black Blood one. Let's talk about the final feather. This beautiful feather shines with the colors of the rainbow. Countless scholars have debated the nature and origin of this forearm-sized feather, but were unable to find an answer. Only two things are certain. It's the last of its kind, and several legends suggest it can be crushed into a light powder that can resurrect a recently fallen creature. Up until now, no one has gathered the courage to put that legend to the test, especially because it would mean destroying the feather. So, these artifacts, each one, and they go on for a couple pages, they're about 3.5 pages of these artifacts. Each one is designed to basically inspire an entire campaign. And so, again, if you're willing to do some of the work yourself, of coming up with your own ideas of, well, I would run a campaign like this, or what if this was manifested in a world like this, then you could probably have an absolute blast reading through this book. It is very, very dense. And what I mean by that is that every single page, there's a lot of stuff on it. And because it's telling you how to play this brand new system, there's going to be a lot of mechanics. If you are someone that just really, really doesn't like reading through mechanics, you may not really enjoy this book, because after every single bit of lore they put in there, they also put a lot of mechanics, because that's what it's designed to. Again, this whole book is designed to help you create your own world, not help you play in a world that they already designed. But if you're willing to do that, there's a lot of cool stuff in here. There's things like sample boss designs, which is not just a boss stat block. It's an entire storyline for these bosses that explain where they come from, their motivations, how they act in battle, why they act that way in battle. There's a lot of good stuff in here for Lorehounds, but you will have to do a little bit of your own work. As far as for $18, again, another book like this, the digital version would still probably run you $40 to $50. For $18, again, it's really hard not to recommend this book. It's a fantastic deal. The other thing that I've been recommending more so, since I've been getting more into art in general, the artwork in this is inspired. It is so gorgeous and pretty. Every single time I open up the PDF of one of these books and I look at the cover art, I get excited and I want to play it. So for Lorehound specifically, art tells as much of a story, if not more of a story, than tons of pages of dialogue. What is it? A picture's worth 1,000 words? So yeah, look and enjoy the art. Look at all the different kind of story ideas that are in here, and then have a little mind wander and come up with your own stories for the things. There's a lot worse ways that you could spend an afternoon. Moving on. So, quick recommendation recap. For players, this is a definite yes. $18, it's hard to say no to it. There's lots of really, really great stuff in here, and specifically character creation in itself is so incredibly fun. The likelihood of anyone being able to create two of the same characters is next to none. There's so many different combinations you can create. You're going to have fun. For DMs, this is another very strong yes. Again, for $18, not only is the system itself really fun to run and be the game master of, but there's a couple systems in here that you can adapt for other games, specifically the artifact system and the clock system. You can use those in literally any game whatsoever, and they will make the games better. The clock system in particular, I use in almost every one of my games now, because it just works so well. So, and then the final group for Lorehounds, this doesn't have a default setting. It actively discourages you from using a default setting, but it is a very kind of lore-based game. The lore is just very generic and kind of spread out in various places. So if you're okay coming up with a little bit of the lore yourself as you read through and kind of think, well, what if? You will probably really, really love this book. And again, $18 is hard to argue with. If you want a fully designed world that you can really sink into and live in this world, it just doesn't exist here. So if you came here just for a recommendation, thank you so much for checking out the video. In the comments down below, what is your favorite JRPG? Are you a classic like Super Nintendo or original NES kind of RPGer? Do you prefer like the PlayStation era and that, or you prefer modern JRPGs? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, I think it's time for us to start this in-depth review. So, as a reminder, this in-depth review is going to be in-depth. I'm going to go chapter by chapter, sometimes page by page. I'm going to talk about the things that I like, the things that I don't like, the things I think they did well, the things I think they need to do better. However, this is going to take a long time. Most of my in-depth reviews run a minimum of an hour and a half to 2 hours. Some of them get closer to the 3-hour mark. So I will always put timestamps in there. Feel free to jump around to the sections that are most interesting to you. I know YouTube would prefer me to say, no, watch it. Sit down and watch it 700 times in a row. That's just not what I do. So check out the in-depth review in pieces. Come back to it later. Put it in your watch later thing and just slowly make your way through it. Or sit through the whole thing. It's entirely up to you, but I want people to be able to experience all of these things in the way that is most useful to them specifically. So, with that being said, it is time for us to start this in-depth review. Chapter 1. Introduction. So, every single TTRPG, especially a core book like this, starts off with an introduction chapter. And most of them, the introduction chapter is a couple pages, and it's basically, what is an RPG? What mean dice? How are you going to play this? Well, you need friends, one of which will be your master. Not that kind of master. We're not that kinky here. But no shaming, your kink is your own. The introduction to Fabula Ultima, because of how the system itself is designed, is a little bit more robust than that. Yes, it does have, the idea of, what is an RPG? And because they pitch the book as a TTJRPG, they also they talk about specifically what's a JRPG. But very quickly, you have your basic, a role-playing game. What's a role-playing game? What are the roles? One person's the game master. Everyone else would be a player. The basics of play, the rules, all that stuff. But then they very quickly start talking specifically about, well, what about Fabula Ultima? Like, this is your kind of standard TTRPG. What makes Fabula Ultima different? And that's where things start getting really good. Also, the artwork is just amazing. Like, the first, on the opposite page from the introduction chapter, they have this gorgeous full-page color picture of a character standing on what appears to be an airship overlooking this amazing floating island with a kingdom on it. And it's just breathtaking. And then a few pages later, they have a bunch of chibi-style artwork of people sitting down around a table playing the game in full costume. It's wonderful. It's amazing. And this particular subsection says, but what is this game about? And it talks specifically about what kind of stories Fabula Ultima was designed to tell. And that's something that a lot of TTRPGs don't do. D&D never talks about the stories that it was designed to tell. It will tell you about the stories that have been told from using D&D, but it never really focuses on, this was designed to tell this kind of a story, and the mechanics are designed to make this type of story work really well. So what is this game about? Heroic and fantastic action. A game of heroes and villains, heroic destiny, challenging battles, and your world. It gives you in 2 pages, or basically 1.5 pages, because the other half of the page is that adorable chibi artwork. It gives you an idea of, hey, this is the kind of thing you're going to experience while you're playing this game. This is what the game's designed around. And I really, really love that aspect of it. Because, again, one of my biggest complaints about most TTRPG core books is a lot of times they are written for people that already play TTRPGs, and they put a huge emphasis on putting the kind of tools right in the front of the book before explaining how you use those tools. And it always annoys me. Fabula Ultima doesn't do that. They start off the book by explaining, hey, this is what you can expect, and if you look at the game through these lenses, it's going to make more sense to you. Does that mean this is the only way to play the game? No, but this is the way it was designed to play, and if you play it in this way, you're going to have the easiest time making it work the way you want it to. And I love that aspect. As soon as you get past that, you get to what's called the 8 pillars. Fabula Ultima, in every single book they have published, will always reference these 8 pillars. These are the things that, again, the game is designed to exemplify and make it really easy to focus on at least one, normally all of them at one point in any campaign. And these 8 pillars are ancient ruins and harsh lands, a world in peril, clashing communities, everything has a soul, magic and technology, heroes of many sizes and shapes. It's all about the heroes, and mystery, discovery, and growth. These are the 8 pillars that drive every single thing that has been designed for Fabula Ultima. And if you use these pillars, the game is going to reward you. It is designed to make it super, super simple and easy to introduce these ideas. And if I didn't read any of the descriptions, but they have little descriptions to give you a better idea of what each one means. But as you heard, they are very generic. They're designed to be interpreted in whatever way works the best for the story you're trying to tell. But they are still guidelines. They help you to understand where to go and how to play the game to have the most fun out of it. And again, it's not something that most tabletop RPGs do. Look at even the most recent 2024 revision of the D&D core books, which I've mentioned before. I was not particularly fond of them, but they definitely did some things better than they have in 50 years. Things like in the player's handbook, the rules for how to play the game comes before the character creation options. They have never had that happen in the history of the game. So those books are designed for people new to the game, which has never happened in the 50 years that Dungeons and Dragons has existed. Even with that, they don't go as far as to tell you, hey, these are the kind of stories the game was designed to tell. And if you use these pillars in your storytelling, you're going to tell really fun, amazing stories that feel like they fit with this system. They just don't do that in the vast majority of TTRPGs. And I think it's a fantastic addition to the system itself. And then they go to the section that's just entitled Your World Could Be. And they talk about kind of the different flavors of a fantasy. They talk about high fantasy. Then they talk about natural fantasy. Then they talk about techno fantasy. each one of those things has its own expansion book, of which, again, the natural fantasy and techno fantasy, I have in-depth reviews of already, if you want to know what they're in those books. But again, they're really, really nice ways to go, hey, we just showed you kind of the generic. If you want to get a little bit more specific, this is what a high fantasy game would be like. And these are things that you might deal with, like high fantasy themes and protagonists. One of the examples, the princess who lost her kingdom to the antagonist's army. It's a very generic prompt, but it instantly can inspire you to go, oh, yeah, I could definitely see she gets kind of deposed from the throne because of, an invasion from another army that was helped by people with inside, like there were traitors inside. So she has to flee, and then she eventually meets this ragtag group of adventurers who decide that they're going to help her retake her throne, and it's going to do like that. Inspires a conversation instantly, and it can inspire really interesting characters. And another example they have, the dashing sky pirate with a heart of gold. Again, they're not meant to be, you can only play this game this way. They're meant to inspire you to be creative. And that's just, that theme will come up over and over and over again in Fabula Ultima, is this idea that the purpose of Fabula Ultima is to inspire you to do cool things, not so much to tell you how to do cool things. Then after that, we actually get into like more mechanical stuff. They talk about game materials, the different dice. Fun fact, I recently discovered the actual proper name for the shape that is a D10. Most people will just say, oh, it's a decahedron, which is the generic term for any three-dimensional polygon that has 10 faces. It's called a decagon. However, the D10 is not what's called a regular decagon or something like that. It actually is a very specific type of decagon called a pentagonal trapezohedron. Pentagonal trapezohedron, because each one of its faces has 5 sides, but they're shaped like kites. They're not a regular shape, like a normal kind of regular 5-sided shape would just be called a pentagon. But because they are oblong and weird shaped, it's a pentagonal trapezohedron. Very interesting. They don't say that in here. I just thought it was an interesting thing to talk about. So they talk about that. They also talk about having some kind of physical token to keep track of your Fabula points and your Ultima points. We'll deal with that a little bit later. Basically, Fabula points are things that players can use to reroll dice and also to kind of change the world. Whereas Ultima points are the same thing, but villains get to use them. Again, we'll talk more specifics later on, but having something to physically track them can be very, very useful, especially since if you use the XP system that's built into the game, one of the ways that you get XP is counting how many Fabula points were used in a session and dividing that by the number of players, and you get that much additional XP. So you're actually incentivized to use Fabula points. And then it gives recommendations, right? If you're a player, this is what you should do to get ready for a game. And then if you're a GM, this is what you should do to get ready for the game. And then that's the introduction. So again, compared to your kind of standard introduction of what is a TTRPG? What mean dice? This is significantly more elaborate and much more friendly to both people who have never played a TTRPG and people like me that have a significant amount of experience playing TTRPGs. I've mentioned this before when talking like from a business sense. Hiring someone with a lot of experience for a position is kind of a double-edged sword, because them having a lot of experience means that they're going to bring a lot to the table and you're going to have to teach them less. However, having a lot of experience also comes with the baggage of they were taught to do things in a certain way, and if those ways conflict with how your business runs, you basically have to untrain them in order to retrain them how your business works. And so with someone like me who has extensive TTRPG experience, having a chapter like this introduction is really nice because it helps me to kind of get out of my own head of, oh, I know how TTRPGs work, and really gets me into the mindset of, oh, this is how Fabula Ultima specifically works. So, yeah, brilliant chapter. Moving on. Chapter 2. Game Rules. This is one of my other favorite things about this book. I've mentioned this before. I hate it when core books do the introduction and then immediately put you into character creation options, because part of the character creation options are going to reference things like, oh, well, you can use a free action. Like it happened in Essence 20 and it pissed me off. It's like, oh, you can do this as a free action. And I go, wow, there's a lot of things that you can just do whenever you want. It's not how things work in the Essence 20 system. A free action isn't free. You have a limited number of them. But they don't explain that when you're going through the rules. You don't find that out until the rule or the character creation stuff. So if you're reading the book from front to back, you will get very, very confused when you get to the character creation. Fabula Ultima doesn't do that. The second chapter is just the rules. It teaches you how the game is played. And I have to say, Fabula Ultima, compared to a lot of other Giga games, like pick up Pathfinder, it's D&D. If you've played D&D, you know how to play it. Pick up any of the World of Darkness books. They're a dice pool system. Like, it's really, really... If you've played a dice pool system-based game, you're going to understand the basics of how everything works. Fabula Ultima generally just doesn't work like any other game I've played. It is a relatively unique system. Now, it's not completely unique. The idea of just rolling 2-digit dice, it's not new or anything. But the way that they present everything, it does feel kind of unique. And so because of that, having the game rules first was one of the reasons I think I fell in love with the system, is because I was able to read through the rules, and then I was able to go to the mechanics and everything and already understood how these mechanics interacted with the rules, as opposed to reading a few pages going, I've got no idea what this means, flipping forward in the book to read the rules, and then flipping back to go, oh, that's what this means. I completely misunderstood how this class runs because I thought the rules worked this way and they worked another way. The action in the game in general is split up into scenes, which is something you'll be very, very comfortable with if you've played any of the Powered by the Apocalypse games. They are a scene-based system as well. And basically, all that means is when you're doing something, you will set up a scene, and then things happen in that scene, and then you move on to the next event. Most people, this is how they play TTRPGs already, but they don't kind of quantify it. They just do it as one long session. Being able to decide when a scene starts and ends can be very, very useful in general. Like, I still use kind of scene-based stuff in my D&D games, despite the fact that D&D doesn't use scenes, simply because it's an easy way to organize it in my brain. And they kind of classify 3 different types of scenes. You have conflict scenes, combat, interlude scenes, effectively non-combat, and then a new thing that's basically unique to Fabula Ultima, or as far as I've seen is unique to Fabula Ultima, which is Game Master scenes. And this is taken directly from the inspiration of JRPGs. When you're playing like Final Fantasy VI, Final Fantasy VI is considered one of the best old school Final Fantasy games, and basically like Super Nintendo RPGs is considered one of the best RPGs on the platform, and one of the best RPGs of all time. When you are playing Final Fantasy VI, there will be times where you stop looking at the player characters and seeing what their experience, and it goes over to see like Kefka poisoning the river, or troops talking about their new Magitech armor or something like this. And this is an extremely common thing in JRPGs in general, is you will be able to see in theater, this creates what's called dramatic tension. What dramatic tension is where the audience is aware of something that the characters are not. And so because of that, the characters will take actions not realizing that they are doing something that's causing conflict with this other thing that they don't know about. So these game master scenes are effectively that. They're cutscenes. And they're actually an essential part of the game for a number of reasons. One, it helps the players to understand how their characters fit into the world and things like that. The other thing is one of the kind of sub sections or subversions of a game master scene is what's called a villain scene, which is basically you get to see what the villain is doing, and they get to have a little monologue, or they get to talk to their underlings and things like that. Again, really, really common in JRPGs to see, what the bad guys are doing at that particular point into the time. But anytime a villain shows up in the game, every player gets a Fabula point, which again is used for everything from using certain skills, re-rolling dice, and you can burn a Fabula point to actually just instantly create something about the game. So villain scenes are actually really, really useful for players because they get an insight into the villain, which, having run D&D for as long as I have, there are some times where you create this really brilliant backstory for a villain, and you have kind of the perfect time for them to finally reveal it to the characters, which also reveals it to the players. And the players, as soon as the villain starts monologuing, the ranger in the back goes, "I knock an arrow and shoot it into his face." And that's it. All of this amazing story that you just wrote is just gone. And so villain scenes allow for you to fill in this information and let the players do it without the players feeling like they need to interact with it, because they physically can't. Their characters aren't there. So I love game master scenes. I think they're really, really fun and interesting. And again, it does mean that the game plays very, very differently than most TTRPGs, because you introduce that idea of dramatic tension. And the players themselves are effectively kind of forced to start thinking about the ideas of metagaming, because they are going to get information that their characters don't from the game master scenes. And they're really going to have to consider how they can deal with that. Where taking actions as the characters without realizing that the villains have just done this. It also means, depending on how well your players deal with metagaming, it also may mean that as a game master, you have to be careful about the game master scenes and villain scenes that you show to them, because if you reveal too much, it makes it too difficult for them not to metagig a game. So, but it does mean that the game plays very uniquely and fun. And then they talk about like sessions and campaigns, and then the various kind of rules, things like add, subtract, multiply, divide. That's the order in which you do stuff when there's multiple numbers you have to deal with. Or specific beats general. Stuff like that. And then they specifically talk about the anatomy of a character. Basically explains the character sheet, explains all the different aspects of characters that the players will need to know. Which again is fine. Another thing that I really like about this system is they have this thing called inventory points. Basically, instead of carrying a bunch of potions or things like that, you just have these inventory points. And in the middle of battle, if you need a potion, you burn a couple inventory points and go, "Look, I have a potion that I bought last time." Glug, glug, glug. But if for whatever reason you don't need a potion for the entire time you're out, your inventory points can be used for other things. And there are particular classes who are built around the idea of using inventory points for more useful things. So I really love that. Then it talks how to run checks. Again, and now I have the attributes in front of me. The attributes are dexterity, insight, might, and willpower. They give brief explanations of what all this stuff is a little bit later. But they explain the basics of checks. If you're doing something like balancing on a rope, that's a very dexterous thing. So if a player wanted to do that, you go, okay, well, roll me a dex check. Whereas let's say figuring out are trying to get a boulder to roll down a hill to kind of deal with some monsters that are down there. Well, it's going to be a strength check, but it's also to aim it right. You're going to need a little bit of kind of brains for that too. So we're going to call that a might insight check. Or maybe you're attempting to endure something really, really painful. Like maybe you're caught out in a blizzard, and so you're trying to kind of just keep yourself moving forward. So that would be a very kind of might-based thing. You have to force your muscles to do it, but it also includes your willpower to not just let yourself give in to the overwhelming despair of being caught in this horrible thing. If you've never been caught in a blizzard before, oh my, I live in Wisconsin. I've had it happen. It is just horrible, especially if it's like whiteout conditions, so you can't see more than like a couple feet in front of you, and you just feel like you are on Hoth, completely alone. Anyway, so yeah, the check system is really, really interesting and is really, really fun to use once you lean into it. I relied a little bit too much. They have like example checks that they say in here, like if you're doing a stealth check, that would be dexterity or something like that. And I leaned really heavily into that list because I was used to having a skill system. Once I threw the list away and I just started going, what do I think this is? Is this dexterity and might? Is this willpower and insight? I started having a lot more fun. And so do the players, because the players, when I would go, okay, let's call this a dexterity might check, they go, well, actually, because of how my character's built and the way that they view this, could I use dexterity insight, because they're going to use their knowledge of anatomy and their control of their body to do this? Yeah, sure. So that's always fun and interesting. Then they talk about critical successes and fumbles. Critical successes are basically if you roll a 6 or higher on the dice and their doubles, that's your crit. And you get what's called an opportunity, which is basically just something good for you. They have an entire list of opportunities, but it's basically, hey, something good happens. A fumble, if you roll snake eyes, it's the only way that you can get a critical miss is you have to roll snake eyes. Depending on how large the dice you're rolling is, that becomes a lower and lower probability. But the cool thing about fumbling is when you fumble, you automatically fail whatever it is that you're trying to do, but you earn a Fabula point because you learn from your failure. So even when you get your crit miss, it's still going to give you something useful. And I really, really like that. I one of the things I hated that became really popular in 3rd edition D&D were fumble tables, where basically anytime you got a nat 1, you would roll in this table and something additionally bad would happen to you because of it. And some of the fumble tables were more kind of silly in nature, but a lot of the ones that I saw were actively punishing. Like, oh, you missed an attack roll? Well, then I guess you lop off your own head and you die. Or you rolled a nat 1. Oh, you attacked your ally with that attack. And it just felt like you were punishing the players for something that they have no control over. The entire purpose of dice is to work as a random number generator. As much as we may claim that we can control how the dice roll by rolling them in a specific way or using a dice tower or something like that, we like to think we can, but the entire purpose of the dice is to be a random number generator. And eventually you are going to get a random number generator that generates the lowest possible value. There's nothing you can do to stop that, and punishing players for random chance is just a dick move. So I really enjoy the fact that fumbles in Fabula Ultima give you Fabula points. So that's really fun. They talk about the various difficulty levels. Because you're rolling anywhere from, I think the lowest you can roll is a D6. And the highest you can roll is a D12. So the lowest you can ever roll is a 2, and the highest you can ever roll if you somehow got 2d12 is going to be a 24. So that's the entirety of the spread. However, rolling 2 dice instead of a single dice spreads out the likelihood of rolling particular things. So the actual they have a little chart here of what easy, normal, hard, and very hard checks would be. And it starts at 7 is easy and 16 is very hard. And then they also have brilliant, fantastic advice for DMs. It just says, go with 10. If you are the game master and find yourself stumped when choosing an appropriate difficulty level for a check, use 10. It's neither too low nor too high, and it's easy to remember. I love stuff like that, where you just go, hey, when all else fails, just use 10. It's right in the middle. There's a good chance that they're going to succeed. If they're using things that they're really good at, they're going to succeed a lot more. And if they're doing something, they're using attributes that are really low for them, there's still a chance of success. So, yeah, I love having little bits of advice like that in a TTRPG. More stuff about checks and successes and failures and stuff like that. They even have an optional rule for success at a cost. If you're familiar with the phrase at all, basically, you failed the check, but I'm going to let you succeed, but there's a caveat to it. Something bad happens in addition to you succeeding. So, yeah. Then they talk about invoking a trait to reroll your dice. Basically, those 3 aspects of your character, your identity, your origin, and your theme, if any of those apply to a check, you roll a check, you're like, ooh, that's a bad one. Well, then you can go, well, I'm making a check here to influence this guard into letting us go into the city without our cart being checked because we're smuggling things. Rolled really poorly, but, my identity is a shadow knight. And we're specifically going to focus on the knight. I was part of a knighthood. I'm familiar with that. So I'm going to use kind of my aspect of that knighthood to try and influence them and convince them more, person to person. And so you get to reroll 1 of both of your dice. That's effectively how they work. And again, a lot of people think, well, since there's no skill system, then you can never, anything outside of combat. I've seen one of the commentaries on how Fabula Ultima runs is like, oh, it's just a combat simulator. There's no way to roleplay in it. That's not true. The trait system, the identity, the origin, and the theme are how you give yourself particular skills that you're better at. If your identity is the plucky thief, well, then anytime you're doing something thief-like, you're probably going to be able to invoke that identity to do that. If your theme is justice, then anytime you're doing something dealing with enacting justice, you're going to be able to do that. And it might be something as simple as, we go to The Princess Bride. Near the end, slight spoiler alert for a movie that's been out for over 20 years. Near the end, Inigo Montoya has found the six-fingered man. And he's running after him because the six-fingered man's a little bitch and he's running away. And so what happens is he's eventually, going through, and the six-fingered man goes through a door and locks it behind him. And Inigo is not a big guy. Mandy Patinkin was not this big, muscular. He was a real skinny dude. And so he gets to the door and he's doing everything and he just can't get through it. And he has to ask for Fezzik to come in and break the door down. However, if that was happening in a Fabula Ultima game, you could say, well, I am finally about to get justice for my father. So I'm going to reroll this horrible roll. I'm going to use justice. Justice is about to be had. So the justice wells up inside of me and I see the door. And I go, hello, door. My name is Inigo Montoya. You are stopping me from getting to the man who killed my father. Prepare to open. So things like that. That is how you use a skill system in this. When you're deciding on your identity, your origin, and your theme, understand those are your skills. So make sure that your identity, origin, and the theme are things that are broad enough that you're going to be able to use them. One of my players was playing a non-human character. He was playing a race that we created for the game called the Kind Folk, which were anthropomorphized animals. And I said, put that into your identity. Put somewhere in your identity, describe that I think he was a red panda, an anthropomorphized red panda who was real tiny. He was adorable. So I told him flat out, put that into your identity so that if there's any situation where your red panda form, the fact that you're small and furry and can climb and stuff like that, would be useful. You now have a way to kind of give a mechanical advantage for the fact that you're a little red panda dude. And so, yeah, when you use those correctly, it makes for a very, very entertaining game. If you completely ignore them, then yeah, this is a combat simulator. So, yeah. They also talk about bonds. Bonds is another thing that's interesting in this. Basically, you can form bonds in a bunch of different ways, but there are kind of three different pairs of bonds that you can have. I don't think... yeah, they'll describe the bonds later, but they just talk about if you have a bond with a character and somehow that bond is going to affect this, then the strength of your bond, which is either 1, 2, or 3, you can just add that to the roll. So yeah. And then they talk about, you know, the different kinds of like accuracy checks and stuff like that. They talk about group checks, which is a cool, interesting system. Effectively how they work, one person is going to be making the check. Everyone else that's helping out will make their own check, and depending on how many successes they get, you get a flat bonus to the person that's actually making the check. You get a +1 for each person that succeeds. So again, very simple, easy way to deal with group checks without having to have a whole bunch of things. Conversations about, well, how is this going to work? Just pick who's leading the check, and then everyone else just tries to see if they can help. And then they have the entire section on clocks. I've mentioned in quite a few different other places, clocks are one of my favorite aspects of this entire game. It's incredibly, it's an incredibly simple idea. It's basically whenever there is something that happens that requires multiple successes or failures for something to happen, you introduce a clock. And so the simplistic nature of it makes it sound kind of, oh, I guess. But the thing with clocks is that everybody can see them. And having that physical manifestation on there, and it could be that you use an actual device, you know, something that's reusable that shows how many sections need to be filled, or it could be as simple as you just draw a circle on the map and then, you know, make your sections and scribble them in whenever they fill them up. But having that physical thing there changes things. It's the same thing as like putting a timer in front of the players as opposed to going, hey, you guys have 10 minutes to decide what you're going to do. Physically putting a timer in front of them changes everything. Now they have a physical manifestation and they can keep checking to see what's going on. And clocks can be positive or negative. You can have a clock where when it fills, something good happens. You have another clock, it's filled by failures that you happen. And if it fills up, bad things happen. Yeah, I love the clock system. I use them in all my RPGs now. Yeah, it's just, there's an entire section talking about how you can use them in that. It's a great thing. And then the bonds section. So, the 6 different bonds that you can have, they're done in pairs effectively. You can have up to 3 emotions from the following 6. Admiration, inferiority, loyalty, mistrust, affection, or hatred. And so they're paired with admiration or inferiority, loyalty or mistrust, affection or hatred. So when you create a bond, you pick a character and then you pick which thing. And negative bonds can happen with player characters. You know, the idea of, I have this kind of inferiority bond with the princess character because I compare myself to her and she's been through so much and I've been through so little, and so I feel kind of inferior to her because she's able to kind of get through all of this and I've struggled with my own things that seem lesser. Or at the same time, you might have an admiration. She's done so many different things and she's still going, so I admire her for that. But yeah, the bonds are effectively, again, another way that you can kind of modify your roles and things like that. And they're much more dynamic. You can never have more than 6 bonds. And the bonds themselves are just really cool and interesting. I love that. Then they have an entire thing about conflict scenes. This is basically the combat section. I won't go into specific stuff here because it'd take way too long. But effectively, initiative is a group check. So one person is going to be actually rolling initiative, which is a Dex Insight check. And then everybody else helps out with that. And depending on how many people succeed, you'll get a bonus. But the only thing that initiative does is pick which side goes first, because they use a variation on popcorn initiative. A player character goes, then an enemy goes. Player character goes, then an enemy goes. And it just kind of flip-flops over and over and over again until everyone's had their turn, and we go to a new round. Really simple, but because of that, because there is no initiative order, that's where a lot of the strategy for the game comes from. You can have things where one character goes, hey, I want to go first this round because I'm going to do something that's going to buff everyone, but it's only going to last until the end of my next turn. So if I go first this round, I buff everybody, and then the next round I go last. Effectively, that means every single character gets 2 rounds of this ability instead of just 1. So there's a lot of strategy in choosing who gets to go first, who gets to go second, and things like that. And because it can change every round, it allows for a lot of dynamic choices. And it does really require the players to actually think about not only what they're going to do, but what the other characters are doing as well. So I'm always a fan of anything that forces the players to actually pay attention when it's not their turn. Yeah. Talks about how space and distances work, which is basically, unless it's really, really important that you have space, just don't worry about it. There's 2 different flavors of monsters. You have ground monsters and flying monsters. Flying monsters can only be hit by ranged weapons. And that's really as crazy as things get as far as space and distance is concerned. You don't need to worry about, do I have enough movement? Any round you take a single action. Easy stuff like that. Talks about the various actions you can take. And goes into all the different things that they do and the effects that you can inflict with them. Yeah, you're kind of standard. This is how combat works. Then they have a section of sample gold clocks, basically giving you ideas of ways that you could use clocks in the game. Because again, they are, unless you've played Blades in the Dark, they are kind of a new system. And so just giving different examples of how you might do it are very, very useful for new game masters and established game masters, just to kind of have a jumping off point for when you're designing your own stuff. And then they have a little section with optional combat rules, which are cool. One of the ones I find really interesting is superiority, which is basically you have this spectrum that starts at 0 in the middle and can go +5 in either direction. And depending on stuff that you guys do, you can either gain or lose superiority points. And once one side has superiority points, they can burn them for extra actions. So it's a really interesting system that can add a little bit more strategy to combat, because the superiority points are shared between both teams. And so understanding when you should burn your superiority points and when you shouldn't and who should use them really creates some interesting stuff. And then it talks about hit points and mind points, which are your limited resources, and dying and stuff like that. What happens when you go to 0 hit points? It's another thing that's kind of interesting about this game. The only time a character dies is if the player chooses, when they hit 0 hit points, to sacrifice their character. And if that happens, they get to go out in a blaze of glory. Otherwise, the character surrenders. They're taken out of that conflict scene, so they can't interact anymore, and something bad happens to them because of it. They might actually be captured. They might have a permanent scar or something, a permanent effect from that thing, or I guess they specifically say permanent or crippling injuries should be avoided, but some long-lasting effect. I guess not permanent. Then you also get 2 Fabula points when you surrender, because again, you learn from failure. So, and then they have some sample consequences from surrendering, which again is really, really good. Then they talk about resting and stuff like that. You know, your standards stuff, the different damage types. There are, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah. There are 8 elemental damage types and then physical damage. And another thing that's a little bit more unique about Fabula Ultima than something like D&D, almost every single monster has either a vulnerability or resistance to a certain damage type. And the vulnerability resistance works just like it does in D&D. If they're vulnerable, they take double damage. If they're resistant, they take half damage. Super easy stuff. But because there's so many different damage types, and unlike D&D 5th edition, where resistances are plentiful, but vulnerabilities are extremely rare, in this one, vulnerabilities are not just common, they are they are expected that the players will take advantage of them, because in like the superiority optional rule, if you hit something with a damage type that it's vulnerable to, you get a superiority point for your side. Yeah, vulnerability and resistance are a big part, and so understanding the damage types are useful. So that, and then they have the status effects, and the status effects basically reduce certain dice by a single thing. Like the dazed condition will temporarily reduce your insight die by 1. So I do like that kind of shifting the size of the dice based on your status. I think is really cool. Then they have the section on Fabula points. There are effectively 4 different ways you can use Fabula points. You can invoke a bond, which just adds a flat modifier. You can invoke one of the traits to re-roll something. You can. There are various skills that require you to burn a Fabula point, and the big one, alter the story. Altering the story is the one that's probably the one that most people think, oh, this is massively game breaking, but basically an example of altering it. After defeating the mirror golem in the depths of the forest ruins, the heroes recover a strange ivory disc bearing mysterious inscriptions. No one among them knows how to read this ancient language. A player decides to spend 1 Fabula point to state his character knows of an elderly scholar living in the countryside nearby who might be able to help. Since this statement does not contradict anything previously stated by the game master or another player, it becomes automatically true. The players mark the position of the scholar's tower on the map. So there's some limitations to altering the story. You're not allowed to alter someone else's story. So if you decide to spend a Fabula point to say, well, Jenny's character is now can fly. Well, that's Jenny's character, so they have to agree with it. Or the DM says, and suddenly a giant wolf appears in front of you, and the player goes, I'm going to spend a Fabula point and say it's not a giant wolf, it's a normal-sized bunny. Well, the GM has already created that character, and so the GM can say, no, that's not how this is going to work. They can agree and go, hey, yeah, no, actually, I like that. Let's see where it goes. But the GM has the final say if they created it, or if it's a player character or something a player character created. Like, let's say there was a part of a character's backstory is they came from a town that was destroyed. You can't then have a player character, as you get to this destroyed town, go, oh, I'm going to spend a Fabula point and say that the town isn't destroyed anymore. Well, that was part of the character's backstory, so they get to choose, well, do I want to allow the town to no longer be destroyed? Will that be something? Or do I want to keep it that way because that's how I designed my character? So it's not as game-breaking as it sounds, but it is unique to Fabula Ultima in the idea that, again, it is intended that the players create as much of the story as the GM, And Fabula points are one of the ways that you can do that. So I really, really like that. Then they talk about villains. That's another thing that I really like about this. Villains have Ultima points, where they can do similar things that Fabula points do. But they have three different kind of flavors of villains. You have minor villains, major villains, and supreme villains. And each one gets more powerful than the last one. But the interesting thing about villains is when they are defeated, first of all, you can burn an Ultima point to allow them to escape, so you can have recurring villains. But if they're out of Ultima points, then they can do this thing called escalating, which is basically a minor villain becomes a major villain. This isn't even my final form. And so they instantly get more powerful and run away to do more things. From a storytelling perspective, writing recurring villains is hard, especially in tabletop RPGs where players are more kind of experienced with the idea of, oh, look, there's a bad guy. As soon as we actually meet him, we get to kill him. Creating recurring villains can be a little more difficult, and the Ultima point system and the escalation system makes it significantly easier to make sense of a villain that keeps coming back for you. And they do recommend that not every single minor villain or major villain should escalate. You should have minor villains, which are just like the boss of a little subplot that's going on, that's all they ever are. But then later on, you'll have a minor villain that turns into a major villain that then turns into a supreme villain. And that's kind of your Kafka-esque character that keeps starting off as kind of a minor annoyance and then getting worse and worse and worse until they're a reality-ending creature. So I love the villains and escalation system built into this. Then they have an entire section on inventory points. Again, the various things that you can use your inventory points to do. And then they also have journeys and travel. Very similar to kind of the One Ring. When you're traveling across the map, you are expected to actually have a meter on the map that shows you exactly how long, 1 inch equals 5 miles or something like that. And when you're traveling around the world map, you are expected to make a travel roll for every certain amount of space that you move on the map. And depending on how dangerous it is, bad things might happen. Basically, travel roll works starting at a d6. Anything 6 or higher, something dangerous happens to the group. That might be a combat encounter. It might also be that they get, a storm comes through and they have to figure out how to endure this. Or a flash fire breaks out and they have to escape from it. It's not entirely a random encounter to the table, but it can be. And if you roll a 1 on any of the dice, you get an unexpected discovery, which, again, this incentivizes exploration and travel. Again, that thing that D&D 5th edition never really put a whole lot of emphasis into, Fabula Ultima does really, really well. And again, I highly recommend doing the travel rolls in front of the players so they can understand not only the larger the die, the more danger they're in, but also being able to see where it comes up. If it comes up on a 5 on a d20, you're like, whew, we just dodged a bullet. So, yeah. Basically, every travel day, you make a travel roll. And they talk about the dangers and discoveries and stuff like that. Then they specifically talk about the dungeons, which is another thing that I think the game does really well because JRPGs are full of the dungeons. And they have like different ways that you can deal with dungeons. You can have a dungeon scene where it's basically just a single scene where maybe there's a check or two that happens and you get through the dungeon. You can have detailed exploration where you have like a map or something and they actually get to go place by place, area by area, and actually go through it. Or you can narrate as an interlude scene. where it's basically just like one long big check to get through every thing. And yeah, they talk about how clocks can be used in dungeons and various things. And then we get to the rules for magic. Magic, for the most part, your combat spells are what are referred to spells. If you're using them in combat, they have a specific thing that they do. They are spells. All other magic is what's called a ritual, and they're not defined. They're not specifically defined. They're defined by the style of magic. So you have multiple different versions of magic, schools, if you want to call them that. You have arcanism, chimerism, elementalism, entropism, ritualism, and spiritism. And each one does things like arcanism is if you're an arcanist and you have the ability to do arcane rituals. It's invoking an arcana and having them interact with the world. Whereas chimerism, chimerists are your blue mages. They learn spells and abilities from creatures. So chimerism is basically using beasts and things like that to affect the world. The ritual system is so interesting because unlike like D&D, where you have all these non-combat spells that tell you exactly what they can and can't do, the ritual system is basically anything outside of combat. If you think your character should be able to do it, you describe, hey, I'm a fire mage, right? And this door is made of wood. I want to burn the door down. That would be a ritual. I am a chimerist. I can speak with animals and things like that. I want to use my connection to animals to be able to see through the eyes of this falcon as it flies over to give us a better idea. So I'm going to invoke my chimerist abilities to connect with animals. Those kind of things. The only limitation to rituals is they shouldn't basically replicate a spell that already happens, and they shouldn't do direct damage to someone. That's what spells are for. And then they talk about the rules of spellcasting and stuff like that. Not going to get into specifics here, but you roll a particular check to see if you meet a number, and then it succeeds or fails. Pretty simple. Yeah, and then they have a little side section on describing your magic. You know, the idea of flavor things. Everything in here is generic, so flavor things so that it feels unique to your character. And then they have the entire section on rituals specifically, where they have a bunch of tables that you can roll on to see how many magic points a particular ritual will cost, based on what it's affecting and how much it's doing. So yeah, useful, great stuff for that. Even advice on how to use rituals in combat and stuff like that. And clocks to make more complex rituals. Then we get to the economy and items section. Basically, this is how you use money, and these are the various things that you can use as kind of money sinks in there. So your kind of standard stuff. A lot of people will complain that 5th edition doesn't have nearly enough lists like this for people to spend their money. I don't 100% agree with them, but I can see where they're coming from. And then the equipment section, just talking about all the different weapons and armor and how they interact with the game. Not going to go into specifics. Another thing that's kind of unique about the system is what are called projects. One of the character classes, the Tinkerer, can do this thing called projects, where they can make shit. And it works. It's basically rituals without magic is what it is, because they use a similar structure, but instead of spending mind points in order to do it, you spend monies. And I love the project system, especially if you have a tinkerer, because they can go, you know what, I want to build this, or I want to make this. Okay. And they have some example projects. Like the first example project is called the Discovery, which is a giant airship. So it costs 6,000 zenit, and it requires 60 progress. They explain how progress works. It's rolls and things like that, and investing materials and stuff like that. Right under that is a Gatling Golem, which is a much smaller project. It only requires 15 progress. It only costs 1,500 zenit. But it basically, you get to create this little golem that you can use in combat, dealing a little bit of damage, but then because it's a physical thing, bad things can happen to it. So the project system and the ritual system are just so much fun, and it does mean that non-magic users can still do really cool stuff. And then the final section is called Group Dynamics, and it's basically kind of your how-to guide of, this is, some very basic conflict resolution. They talk about stuff like lines and veils and trust and stuff like that. And then other stuff like players leaving the group or absent players. Just your kind of basic, hey GM, this is some stuff that's going to happen that has nothing to do with the game, but you're going to have to deal with it as the game master. So, yeah. So that is the rules section. Moving on. It's a very, very technical section. I think it's the longest chapter in the book. Chapter 3. Press start. Harkening back to old video games where in order to start the game, you would hit the start button. They name it Press Start, and the first thing they talk about is Session 0. And again, part of playing Fabula Ultima, and if you want an example of it, the Session 0 for my Fabula Ultima campaign is on this channel. Go to the playlist, you can see the entire thing. Part of the Session 0 is sitting down, and you start by creating the game world. The GM will generally kind of give an idea or start asking for ideas of, okay, well, what kind of world are we thinking about? My mini campaign, I wanted a kind of classic elemental crystal based Final Fantasy style world. So I go, everybody, this world is going to have 4 elemental crystals: water, earth, fire, air. And then I went to each character. Each one of you guys is going to be able to place a crystal somewhere on the map and then describe something about that country that has this crystal in it. And it worked really, really well. They do have example blank world maps that you can use, that you can download directly from the website. That's what I used. And it worked really, really well. But part of creating the world is, as the world is getting created, it's also going to start inspiring the players as far as like what characters they want. It's like, oh, well, you go to player 3, why don't you create a town? What town do you want to have in there? They go, well, I kind of like the idea of a town of summoners. This is a town that's kind of sequestered away from the world, where the ancient magic of summoning is studied by everyone. Everybody has a kind of partner spirit that when they get to a certain age, part of their kind of coming of age ceremony or adulthood ceremony is they finally get their little partner spirit. And as soon as they kind of come up with that, players start going, oh damn, well now I want to be an arcanist so that my partner spirit I can actually manifest. Whereas another person is like, well, I want to be a wayfarer because I want my partner spirit to kind of fight in combat with me. And so stuff like that. Part of the reason that you want to create the world with the players is it's going to inspire their characters. After or as part of that, you also might want to talk about like commitment and expectations, like, hey, this is kind of the adventure that I want to run and things like that. They talk about safety and stuff like that, your lines and veils and stuff like that. Talk about the tone and the theme for the game, and then you get to the actual world creation. And they have a pretty easy to follow step-by-step guide of this is how you do it. You start with the shape of the world, grab a map sheet for it. What's the role of magic and technology in your setting? Is it super, super rare? Is it super, super common? Do they fight? Is there like, these people are like, magic super good, and then these people are like, technology super good, and they're always at odds. The next section, create your major kingdoms and nations. 5, discuss major historical events. 6, what are the great enigmas and mysteries of the world? And then 7, what terrible threats cast a shadow over your world? And this is where the GM is going to start getting inspirations for the various villains that you will have to deal with. And they have a bunch of tables that you can roll on, like magic and technology. There's a D20 table. So, like, if you rolled a 15, spellcasters are trained in academies and then hired by nobles. That's how magic and technology works in this particular thing. And they're generic enough that if you go, okay, well, that works. Let's roll on it again and see what else we can get. You could have spellcasters are trained in academy, then hired by nobles. Then you roll a 7. The world is kept together by some ancient and powerful magic, and that's why they're. So it's not like you can only roll on this one, and that's it. Then they have kingdoms and nations that allows you. It's like, okay, well, player 2, let's let you design a kingdom or a nation. You can roll on the kingdom and natures table, and it basically shows that particular nation is going to be an empire or a city-state or a holy kingdom or a protectorate. So yeah, having all of these tables, again, can be absolutely wonderful to avoid the choice paralysis that is inherent when you're asking players to just create a brand new world. 9 times out of 10, if someone's sitting down at a TTRPG to be a player, they've been told what world they're going to be inhabiting. They don't get a choice in it. If you don't want to play in this world, go find another table. So that's something that makes this really, really interesting. Then we get to group creation. You kind of choose why your group is getting together. They have a couple group types that you can use. Things like brought together by fate or revolutionaries. Generic terms that will give a group dynamic. You don't have to use these, but again, it's another thing that reduces that choice paralysis. And then we get to character creation. I've mentioned before, I just love character creation in this. I've already talked about it at length, so I won't go into super detail about most of it. But you start by choosing an identity, just a short sentence that describes your character. Things like elderly amnesiac sorcerer or freedom-fighting brawler. Just something that gives a really clear description. And again, in order to use the identities and stuff well, you should include enough in the identity that it's going to be useful in a number of different situations. The entire point of having an identity is being able to invoke it to be able to reroll into the things like that. They have multiple tables that you can use to create your identity. So you have your core concept and then an adjective and a detail. So core concept, let's say you are a monk, and the adjectives you get is animal loving, and the detail you get seeking justice. So an animal loving monk who is seeking justice. There, you have a really interesting, unique identity for your character. And all you had to do is roll on a couple to the tables for it. So cool stuff there. And then your theme, they have some example themes. You don't have to use them, but they're a good idea if you haven't created a theme before. And then your origin, basically, where are you from? And again, each one of these things you should be thinking about, okay, how am I going to use this in gameplay? This is not just pure roleplay stuff. All of these things have mechanical advantages. And because they require Fabula points in order to use, they should be useful in as many situations as possible, because the limiting factor of whether you can use them or not is not how useful they are. It is how many Fabula points you have to be able to spend. So, yeah. Then we get to the classes. I love this. It's so cool. The classes, I will read them again to you. Arcanist, Chimerist, Darkblade, Elementalist, Entropist, Fury, Guardian, Loremaster, Orator, Rogue, Sharpshooter, Spiritist, Tinkerer, Wayfarer, and Weapon Master. Each one has their own thing that they do. They're all lovely and amazing and wonderful. I love everything about them. We'll go into details of each one as we go through. One of the other things you do is you choose the base die size of your attributes. They have a couple different ways you can do it. You have these different arrays. You can have a D8 and everything. You can have a one D10, two D8s, and one D6, or you can have two D10s and two D6s. So pick and choose. It's generally a little bit easier to start with your classes. Pick out your classes and then choose your attributes. That's why they have the classes listed first. Simply because certain classes are going to specialize more in using certain attributes. And so knowing what attributes you're going to be using the most of is useful before picking your attributes. Yeah, like this first section is just explaining how you get all of your different numbers for it. And then the basic weapons that you're going to be using, very useful, blah, 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 blah. The next section is called Classic Characters, and it's one of my favorite things that Fabula Ultima does in every single one of the books that they release. Anytime they introduce new character classes, they have these classic character lists. And what these are is, instead of having to kind of choose, custom build your character itself by choosing a bunch of skills from a bunch of different classes, you're just like, you know what, I wanted to be a monk. How do I be a monk? What do I do to be a monk? Well, one of the classic characters is a pugilist. And they tell you what spread you should have for your skills. So dexterity D8, insight D6, might D10, willpower D8. And then they tell you what skills you should take. Fury, take 3 levels. Take Frenzy and 2 levels of Withstand. Weapon Master, 2 levels. Bone Crusher and Counterattack. Now you have kind of a standard pugilist, a standard monk-style character. They have other stuff, like they have a gambler character, a gunslinger character, a ninja. And these are all kind of classic stuff. Again, to get rid of that choice paralysis, you can start with one of these classes. And it goes on for a while, and they have some cool stuff. Things like a Valkyrie, or a Spell Fencer, a Red Sorcerer. And then we get to the classes themselves. And like I said, every single one of these classes inspired me, got me excited. Arcanist is probably my favorite, because when I was a young kid, and by young I mean like elementary school age, I loved the idea of summoner characters, especially since my favorite Final Fantasy at the time was Final Fantasy V. This is long before we got Final Fantasy V in the US. I had found out about emulators and translations. And so I played one of the earliest translations. I believe the first like really big major translation of a Japanese game was actually Seiken Densetsu 3, what's now known as Trials of Mana. That was one of the first really big translations that came out. I played that game like crazy because I love Secret of Mana. But I remember being introduced to Final Fantasy V and absolutely falling in love with it. And I loved this summoner. I thought it was so cool, but I hated the fact that the summons were so expensive and they only did one thing. And so I came up with all these stories about the idea of summoners that actually could summon these creatures, and they stuck around for a while. I actually wrote for a creative writing class in 6th grade. I wrote this entire story about this kid that gets isekai'd before I even knew what isekai'ing was. This kid that gets isekai'd into this world, and he suddenly discovers that he has this ability to summon elemental creatures. And I just loved that. So the Arcanist, that's your summoner. But the way that they manifest is a little bit different. And there's actually a revision that was published by the creator that kind of changes how your Arcanum work. And I actually prefer that version of it. But the basics of the Arcanist is when you summon an Arcanum, you spend 40 mind points. It's a lot. And you summon the Arcanum, and it's called merging with it. You will have a merge effect. They have example Arcanum, but it's recommended that you create your own Arcanum with the DM. But like the Arcanum of the Forge, their domains are fire, heat, and metal. And their merge effect, you have resistance to fire damage, and any fire damage you deal ignores resistance. And then you have a dismiss effect. Basically, once you're done with the Arcanum, you dismiss it. The dismiss effect for the Arcanum of the Forge, either you create something, a magic item or something like that, and it does fire damage if it's a weapon, or Inferno. As it goes away, it hits all the bad guys on the field with fire damage. So very similar to the old Final Fantasy style of summoning, where it comes in and does some super big attack, but it also can stay for a while and give you a passive effect. The revision version adds an additional option where you have a merge effect, you have a surge effect, which is basically as long as it exists, you can use this as an additional kind of action you can do. Some of them give you an additional attack, some of them allow you to do different things, and then you still have a dismiss effect. And I like that version better because it makes it feel more powerful and more important than just having a passive effect, and then the only way you get an active effect from any of the Arcanum is to dismiss them. So yeah, and then they give a bunch of examples of different Arcanum. I love every single one of them. I think they're really interesting and fascinating. And then we go to the Chimerist. It's your standard blue mage. They can learn spells from certain types of enemies, which I really, really love. The ability is called Spell Mimic. And then they have other things like a skill that allows them to speak to certain kinds of monsters. Or ways for them to recover some of their mind points and stuff like that. It's all interesting stuff. Then we have the Dark Blade. This is your standard kind of Dark Knight. They're actually a bond-focused class where they actually have the ability to create bonds in the middle of battle and then use those bonds to get extra damage and stuff like that. They can sacrifice their own health to be able to do more damage in that. So your standard Death Knight. You have Elementalists. These are your standard elemental wizards. And they have cool things. One of the things I like, one of their skills is called Spell Blade. So if you would prefer to be more that kind of Blade Singer style class, you can take the Elementalist, but specifically choose the Spell Blade features and not be your standard wizard. You'll be a sword mage kind of thing. So I really enjoy stuff like that. And then they have an entire list of spells. And these are just example spells. They also highly encourage the GM to create custom spells for you, because that's what it's for. The Entropist is kind of a combination of like a dark mage and a time mage. They have the ability to kind of use dark magic in general and do dark damage, but they also have the things that allow you to slow down or speed up to the time. You can replace rolls and things like that. It's a cool thing. The Fury is kind of your barbarian style character. It's a character that just relies a lot on kind of weapon-based attacks and doing lots of them. Then the Guardian, your standard guard. My favorite thing about the Guardian, one of their skills is called Dual Shield Bearer. You basically not only get to wear two shields and benefit from both of them, but they become a weapon where you can beat people to death with your shields. I love it. It's the greatest thing ever. Then we get to the Lore Master, which is much more focused on learning and identifying monsters and other things like that. It very much is a more support style class that has lots of cool stuff that you can do. The Orator, Bard. Their control base thing where they can do a lot of things that they can inflict status effects and confuse people and your standard Bard kind of stuff. Rogue, exactly what you think it is. They're fast, they can dodge, they can do a sneak attack type thing. They can steal shit. It's your standard rogue. Sharpshooter, this is your range-based class. And while the picture of it is someone with a bow, you can just as easily have your gun-based sharpshooter as well. One of my favorite abilities that the sharpshooter has is a skill called Crossfire. basically, if you can see a creature performing a ranged attack, you can shoot their attack out of the sky with your attack. It costs mind points, but it's a massively cool thing, especially if you're doing like a gunslinger. Like you see someone is like, oh shoot, there's a dude, he's gonna shoot one of my guys. You just go pew, and you shoot the bullet out of the sky. Isn't that awesome? It's great. After that, you have the Spiritist. That's your kind of standard healing-based class. If you want to have more support or healing-based spells, your Spiritist spells are going to be in that realm. You have the Tinkerer. They have cool stuff that they can do. They can create gadgets. And as they invest more in the gadget skill, they have different things that they can make and do cool stuff. The cool thing, they have 3 different flavors of gadgets they can make. Alchemy, you create potions and bombs. Alchemy is potions and bombs. You have infusions, which is basically you create magic ammo and you get a special magic gun. That you can make. Infusions is just literally that. You can infuse things. Then the last thing is Magitech, which you can make. You can make a little pet, a little robo pet that goes with you. You can make a magic cannon, basically a cool magic gun. And then you can make Magispheres, basically your kind of materia for Final Fantasy VII, where basically you can create a sphere that allows you to basically create one of these things and then cast a spell, despite the fact that you're not a technical spellcaster. You've recreated the spell using technology. Love stuff like that. It's really cool. And then we have the Wayfarer. That's your standard pet class. The first skill on their thing is Faithful Companion. But they're also the more ranger style class where they have stuff that helps with travel rolls and other stuff like that. They also have treasure hunter abilities that make it easier for you guys to get discoveries on your travel roll. So they're your standard ranger style class. Then the final class is the Weapon Master. It's exactly what it sounds. It's your kind of standard fighter. They do stuff with weapons and they can do cool stuff with weapons. So yeah, those are the classes. Again, I just love everything about them because depending on how you mix up your particular class makeup, you can make just about any kind of character that you want. You just flavor it the way that feels the best to you. And it's just such an interesting system. So after that, we get to the prologue section, which is basically about kind of creating the backstory of your character. And depending on the group dynamic, they have a bunch of different tables that you can roll on if you're having a hard time kind of coming up with a backstory. Like for the Revolutionaries table. Here's some questions you can ask about your character. You're about to have a secret meeting with a potential ally. You won't have much time to talk and must avoid being discovered at all costs. Who is this person and how can they help your cause? Who gave you their name? So this is all stuff that will help you design a backstory for your group itself and your character. And then they talk about experience and stuff like that. It's pretty simple. If you want to use your kind of standard experience system, you get a set amount of experience every time you play, and then you can get bonus experience for doing certain things, spending Fabula points, stuff like that. And then they talk about how leveling up your character works and yada, yada, yada. They have optional advancement rules, which again are really, really nice if you want to play the game a little bit differently, which I really, really enjoy. And then you get to the heroic skills section. Heroic skills effectively are feats, but the way that you get them is you can only ever invest 10 levels in any class. Once you hit 10 levels, you can no longer, when you level up, you can no longer take skills from that class. You've maxed out that class, and when you do that, you get to choose a heroic skill. And some heroic skills don't have any prereqs. Any character can take them. Most of them, however, will require you to have mastered a particular class. Like the monkey grip heroic skill, you have to have mastered the fury in order to do that. So when you're leveling up your character, you can never have more than 3 non-mastered classes. So eventually you're going to have to master one of your classes. And as soon as you do that, you get one of these heroic skills, which are kind of game-changing. Like the monkey grip that I talked about. You can wield 2-handed weapons that are flails, heavy weapons, spears, or swords in a single hand. So you can now dual wield 2-handed weapons, or use a 2-handed weapon and a shield. That's a really, really big deal, and it massively changes how the game plays. And that's what they're very similar to kind of 5th edition feats. They're going to massively change how you play the game, and the requirements are going to kind of tell you what they're going to interact with the best. Like, again, the monkey grip, you have to have mastered the fury class because they're all about kind of strength and barbarianism and stuff like that. So that's why you need that. Whereas the rampart skill requires you to have mastered the guardian class. And when you master your second class, you don't have to choose a heroic skill that requires that second class. You can continue just choosing heroic skills that just require your first class. So yeah, cool stuff. Definitely means that as you get to higher classes, you get to do even more interesting, cool stuff. So, moving on. Chapter 4, Game Masters. This is your standard Game Master chapter. One of my favorite things on the first page, the first subtitle is "No one is born a GM." And I really love this sentiment because so many people are terrified of becoming a game master because they're like, well, what if I can't do it? What if I screw up? What if I ruin everybody's night? Nobody is born a GM. Everybody screws up. Everybody learns their own way. Don't worry about it. It's much more important to try than it is to succeed. It gives some basic ideas of, what you're supposed to do. They have a section before play. These are the things that you should be doing before you even get started. The second section is during session 0. This is what you should be doing during that. During play, between sessions. Again, it's a really, really nice kind of how-to guide for someone that's never been a game master. Hey, these are some things that you should be doing in each different section to kind of take some of the burden off of, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know how this is supposed to... Here's some guidelines. Do you have to do all of them? Absolutely not. But it's a nice place to start. And then the other thing that I really, really enjoy about the Game Master section, the section, kind of subsection, is called character classes. Well, wait a minute. Didn't we just deal with character classes? Yes. But what this is a section that is basically explaining to the GM, hey, this is a game about heroes. The players want to be heroes. And in order to make them feel powerful, there are certain aspects of each class that tend to benefit from certain types of stories. Like, for example, the Darkblade section. If someone picks the Darkblade as the core concept for their character, the tragedy that awakens their powers should play a major role in the story. Have the player talk about it, then create scenes that bring back echoes of that dark past. Due to their ability to negate dark damage, undead are extremely resilient to Duskblade's Shadow Strike. Keep this in mind when designing battles. The third point. There might come a time when the Darkblade can finally leave their past behind. When this happens, you might have their skills flipped. Maybe they can now create bonds of affection with Heart of Hope and unleash light damage with Celestial Strike. Discuss these options with the player and see if it's something that interests them. So this entire section is basically helping the DM to understand, hey, if this is kind of the core concept, if this is the class that at character creation they invested the most points in, these are probably some things that are going to appeal to them because these are the things that that character class is designed around. And it's really, really wonderful advice that I wish they had in other tabletop RPGs. A lot of times they kind of leave writing the stories entirely up to the GM. Hi, either run our pre-written adventure or figure it out on your own. And this is giving advice of, hey, if you want a story that the players are going to be invested in, connect it to their classes. The classes are an important part of their characters, and these are kind of generic themes that are built into the classes. So if you write stories around them, the players are going to naturally gravitate towards these stories, and they're going to feel more connected to them. And I think it's such a great thing to have in a TTRPG because, again, the majority of TTRPGs are designed for people that already know how to play, and they expect new players to go to someone that already knows the game in order to learn the basics. And that's especially true for game mastering. Most dungeon master guides or game master guides or game master chapters are kind of coming into this with the idea of, well, even if you're brand new, here's a bunch of tools that you can use. You'll eventually understand how that works. But this one is actually going outside of its way to go, hey, these are tips that can make you that can help you write compelling stories that your players connect with. And it's just not something that I've seen in another TTRPG. Excuse me. All right, the next section, the art of villains. This is another thing that's really, really fantastic. As when I was an actor, I played almost exclusively villains because they're super fun to play. But doing that for a while, you start to really understand what makes a really compelling villain. And it's not something that's explained in most TTRPGs. Again, it's another thing that they just go, well, you'll figure it out eventually. This goes into the kind of depths and ideas of this is what a villain is. They talk about their goals and how different types of villains are going to have different kind of goals. Minor villains generally have simple or at least very personal goals, such as saving someone's life, stealing a magic artifact, or seizing control of a village. Whereas when you get to supreme villains, have goals that can affect the entire world and change the laws of reality, rewinding time, erasing soul energy, or even becoming a deity. So it kind of shows you, depending on the type of villain you're dealing with here, these are their goals. And they talk about the escalating thing. So if your minor villain starts off with something simple and then escalates to a major villain, well, their goal should become bigger as well because they've effectively failed in their goal when they were forced to escalate. So yeah, just really, really great tips and ideas on how to create compelling villains and how to introduce them to your characters. The next section is about dungeons. Again, another thing that's never... In the game of Dungeons and Dragons, they never once talk about this is how you design a dungeon, aside from this is how you read a dungeon map. This one they talk about, okay, this is the various kinds of dungeons, and this is the kind of stuff that you should prepare if they're going to be doing this. If you want it to be a very, very simple dungeon that's mostly going to be like an interlude scene, well, then you don't need to get super, super specific. You may not even need like an entire map for it. Maybe just kind of come up with some ideas about it. But if you're going to do detailed exploration, this is what you need to do. So yeah, really, really fantastic advice is here. They have tables that you can roll on if you're running into choice paralysis. Things like population. Number 5 is manifestations of elemental energies. So that's one of the things that you find in that dungeon. And they have a reward section. Another thing that's very, very useful. Hey, how do I reward my players, and how does that change based on what level they are? Because rewards for level 5 characters are going to be very different for rewards to level 30 characters, because they've done a lot more. They have a lot more things that they want to do. So, yeah, really nice, good advice there. They have a section on designing rare items, which are basically your standard magic items. They give some. They have tables that you can use to figure out the different properties that you can add to them and how much more expensive it makes the various weapons. They have a flow chart to follow for designing it. They have some sample ones, which there are some really, really great ones. Like one of the one of the sample rare arcane weapons is called the Necronomicon. If you know, you know. It's a two-handed melee weapon, because that's what rare arcane weapons are. When you hit one or more creatures with a defensive spell, each of them suffers shaken, because you're casting it out of the Necronomicon. Basically, each different category of weapons, they have a bunch of different things. One of the sample rare brawling weapons is just called the Nekode, which is basically giant cat claws. And all it does is it's a standard one-handed melee weapon. It doesn't have any magic qualities. It just has extra accuracy to it. Or another one, the Lobster Claw. Each target hit by this weapon suffers slow. And stuff like that. It's really cool, interesting. So, again, just a great section. And I'm always a fan of, if you're going to give the rules of, hey, this is how you create your own magic items, you should have at least a couple examples, because those examples are going to clarify things that you can't really write down. Just seeing how they work definitely makes things better and easier to understand. Same thing is true about rare armors and stuff like that. The other thing I really like about this, every single rare item they have has a little pixel representation. Like if you found it in an old like Super NES game, this is the icon that would be next to it. And I just love that. There's just so much flavor and joy in this book. It's just wonderful. And then they have accessories and how to design those and stuff like that. So again, more stuff that you make, examples of different accessories. Then we get to the artifacts section. As I mentioned in both the should Lorehounds buy the book and should GMs buy the book, artifacts are one of my favorite aspects of these, because these are big magic items that are not intended to be used by the players because they're just too powerful. They are supposed to be so powerful that the world is going to fight over them, and they're going to create conflicts in the world. And I love that idea. The idea that there are these certain items that are just so world-changing that they're going to inspire an entire campaign. Example, Soul Rend. This hyper-sharp edge glows with ominous light. Resembling the lower portion of a shattered greatsword, this artifact is almost useless in an actual fight. Its true power lies somewhere else. If the correct sequence of stances and movements are performed, the wielder may isolate a single consciousness present in the stream of souls and sever it from the flow. This is a ritualism effect of extreme potency, made easier if the soul in question belongs to someone who recently passed, if they were of especially strong character, or if the wielder of the soul rend has a deep personal bond with them. Depending on the outcome of the check, the soul might only be temporarily severed or even become unable to return to the spiritual stream, doomed to gradually vanish into oblivion or trapped in eternal torment. So this is a sword that the soul stream is one of the kind of 8 pillars, where it's basically there is a life stream or something in the world where when people die, their souls kind of rejoin it to be cleansed, and then they get reincarnated over and over and over again. And so the soul rend basically stops that. You can interrupt effectively the way the afterlife works in this Giga game. So it's this massive the thing that, again, depending on how common like resurrection and stuff like that is in your world, the ability to rip souls away from this thing is a really, really big deal. And, the Soul River, like in Final Fantasy VII, people might use it as a power source or something. So that's the kind of item that nations would fight over it. And that's what these artifacts are meant to be. They're supposed to inspire a campaign, and they are really, really cool. I love everything about it. After that, we get to the designing battles section. Basically, just your kind of standard, hey, this is how we do combat. They talk about the different flavors of monster. You have soldiers, elites, and champions. Basically, soldiers is just a standard monster. An elite counts basically like 2 monsters, and a champion counts as 3 or more monsters. So if you're creating like a boss battle, you probably create a champion and then give it, an equal number of turns that the players would have. So if you have a 5-person party, you probably make a champion 5. So it gets to take 5 actions during the term. It gets the number of hit points. It's effectively 5 creatures in one thing. So it talks about that. It talks about levels and ranks, the ideal length for combat in Fabula Ultima, dealing with damage types, information hints, stuff like that, swarms, obstacles and gimmicks, environmental effects that you can add to make combat a little bit more interesting, and then specifically boss battles and phases and stuff like that you can use. Then they have a section on designing NPCs, which is basically this is how you create your monsters and stuff like that. And they talk about the different species and what they generally mean, like a construct. Constructs are immune to poison damage, resistant to earth damage, and immune to the poisoned condition. And then depending on the species that you choose, they'll have a number of starting skills that you can use to kind of customize them and turn them into whatever you're looking for. And the higher the level of the creature, the more skills that make it more interesting that you can add to it. And yeah, a really easy, simple to understand system for creating your NPCs and your monsters and everything like that will give you a very simple to use stat block. I created monsters for my game multiple times. It was really, really fast. One of the easier systems I've ever used for creating monsters. It wasn't quite as easy as like Open Legend, which is still my favorite system to use to create monsters in, but it's still very, very simple and easy to do. And then they give example boss designs or sample boss designs, which is not just here's a stat block. They give you an entire background for the creature. They have gorgeous artwork for it, and they explain the entire process of designing the monster from scratch, including its backstory. And then it shows you the stat blocks, and it tells you how it acts in combat, and it's so interesting. And then they do it 2 times in here. They have Angela the Fire Mage and the Thorn Shark. So just giving you 2 good examples of boss monsters. And yeah, that's the end of that chapter. Moving on. Chapter 5, Bestiary. This is one of the shorter chapters. And it's just because, again, they don't give a ton of examples. They mostly expect you to design your own monsters. But they do give rules for like how to study and the roles that you can make to learn stuff about them. So if the players want to know more about the creature, they can make a study check, and depending on what role they get, they'll learn certain aspects for it. So that's useful. And then it talks about basically how to read the stat blocks, which is nice. And then we get to the actual section. It's the actual monsters. They're separated by species, and I think each one basically gets 4 to 8 creatures. So like beasts, they have the caterpillar, gray howler, the vampire bat, the giant rat, the bombard ant, the sun bear, the thornfish, and the white howler. It's pretty simple, pretty easy. Each one plays a little bit differently. They all have different resistances and vulnerabilities and stuff like that. Then they go through constructs and elementals and all this other stuff. It's really simple and really easy to understand, and it gives you a great basis, if you don't want to start by building everything yourself, you've got enough monsters here of various levels as well. I don't think any of them are higher than level 20. So you don't have to worry about only being able to use like some of them because the rest are designed for high level parties. No, most of these can be used against even a beginning level party, depending on how many use. Like even a higher level monster, if you only use like one of them against a team of 5, you're still going to be perfectly fine. So yeah. Cool 6. Oh, and every single monster has a little portrait for you as well, which is really nice, and the artwork is just adorable. So yeah, moving on to final thoughts. As I have said over and over and over in this in-depth review, Fabula Ultima is by far one of my favorite TTRPGs I have ever played or run. It is so great. It feels like it was written for someone like me. It is generic enough that I can create any kind of class that I want and any kind of character that I want, and there's going to be a mechanic that allows me to do that. But it's specific enough that I'm not going to have to make up rules in order for my class to play the way that it wants. Everything is explained in such great detail in here, and everything has such a well-written kind of conversational description that if you're a brand new game master reading through this book, even if you never run Fabula Ultima, is going to make you a better game master. If you're an extremely experienced game master like myself, reading through this book is going to make you a better game master. So there's so much about this book that just does things right. And I cannot recommend it enough. Every time I open the book, I want to start up a brand new Fabula Ultima campaign right then and there. I have theory crafted classes for it over and over and over again, just because I love it so much. I cannot recommend this book enough to people. Anyway, that going to be all for me today. As always, again, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. In the comments down below, if you made it this far, what is your favorite character class from any JRPG you've ever played? It could be like a kind of class that multiple characters can kind of turn into, like the job system of Final Fantasy III and Final Fantasy V. It can just be a specific character that you really, really enjoyed. Let me know in the comments down below who that is. Otherwise, again, is all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.